I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up in Holler. Will, the Gators go into Austin, Texas, and fall to 4-5 after a really rough afternoon. No DJ Lagway. Texas comes into the game as a 21.5 point favorite. Look, even the most optimistic Florida fan had to look at this and say it's probably going to be a tough one against a very solid football team. But Florida was consistently outmatched on both sides of the ball throughout most of the day. They fell behind 42-0 in the third quarter. Arch Manning was able to coast home throughout the fourth quarter, and the Longhorns mercifully took a knee to only keep the contest at 49-17. Spurrier was there. Spurrier was on hand doing a little gator chop in front of the Bevo. Spurrier probably would have punched it in. So they took it a little easy on us at the end. 49-17. Texas, 562 total yards, 352 through the air. Florida surrenders 6.8 yards per carry on the ground, so it wasn't much better there. And in the middle eight, Will, the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first four of the second half, something that we stressed in the magazine this year, Texas outscored Florida 21-0. So Florida suffers its fifth loss of the season, fourth by double digits. Uh, and look, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room here. Yes, it's tough to win on the road with your third string quarterback. Tons of starters out across the board. You're playing with a lot of depth in this roster that does not have great depth to it. And a lot of young guys get out there. But it's even tougher to win on the road when your football team does the following. The kicker misses a 36-yard field goal. The offense turns the ball over three times within a five-drive stretch in the second quarter. It hands Texas a short field on one of those drives in the first half, one of those first half touchdowns. The defense allows four other first half touchdown drives of 85, 50, 80, and 45 yards respectively. And per SEC StatCat, the offense completes only five total passes in front of the line of scrimmage. The whole day, Will. The whole day. Great website, by the way. SEC StatCat. Give our guy Clark a look if you get a chance. Great charts on there. But five in front of the line of scrimmage the entire day. This is the Florida Gators, man. Steve Spurrier's on hand watching the team complete five passes in front of the line of scrimmage. Just can't stress that enough. But Will, we could go on and on. We really could go on and on, and we will for a little bit here. But this should have been a cool moment. Texas joins the SEC. We go to Austin, Texas for the first time here as an SEC opponent. Hopefully, it's the start of a fun SEC rivalry here. And instead of having a cool moment, it's just a rough afternoon. It's really they're in one place as a program, and we are in another at this moment. And we will get to the statement that was released the previous week, but maybe one of the all-time graphics in television history is Scott Stricklin's quote about Billy Napier while standing on the sideline with 42-0 below him. So, Will, I'll let you take it from here, but first, let's start with the game itself here. How did you feel about the performance overall? Were you as thrilled as Jesse Palmer was with our effort on the day, or were you getting a little tired of Jesse Palmer giving us little head pats for a good effort out there, boys?
I'm not sure that anyone was as thrilled as Jesse Palmer was about the effort that Florida had in this one. He was
He's one of
very
our own,
impressed.
right? Come on,
He
Jesse, let's go, dude.
he was very impressed at Florida's ability to show up and pretend to play the game of football because that's what this was. It was a scrimmage. It was 35-0 at the end of the half. That you forgot the false start before they handed the ball off to Jacoby Jackson on 3rd and 15 to basically just, try to gain a yard before a punt. He fumbles it and that
Mhm.
turns into 14-0. It was still 14-0 with like 5 minutes left in the second half. And then bam, 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 they get a touchdown, they get an interception, they get another touchdown. All of a sudden you're down 35-0, like you mentioned, 42-0 by the time you get out of the first drive of the second half, and ball game over. And look, I don't know that anybody really expected Florida to win this game with Aiden Warner at quarterback, but when you give up 10.1 yards per play on defense in the first half.
Mm,
You're not winning this with Dan Marino at quarterback. You're not winning it with Peyton Manning at quarterback, and you're not winning it with DJ Lagway at quarterback. And we talk all the time about quarterback being a game changer and being giving you the ability to make some mistakes, and that's certainly true. Florida knew coming into this one they couldn't make any mistakes, and then they made mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake, and it was ugly. It was ugly to a point where I've got people reaching out to me saying that they didn't watch the second half. I've got people reaching out to me saying that they went shopping with their wife instead of just watching the game anyway because they were like, I knew what was going to happen, and then I just looked at the score and kind of shook my head and said, well, I made the right decision. So, Florida has some of the most passionate fans that you're going to find out there, and the apathy within the program after this one was so significant. I have a bunch of buddies I'm going to be seeing this weekend because I'm going down to see the LSU game this week. I had a bunch of buddies who went out to Texas, and they're like, great experience. Wish I hadn't gone to the game. And
right.
that's not the way it's supposed to be when you're the University of Florida. And so, there are all sorts of things we can talk about in terms of where the programs are and that this was a difficult opponent and that you and I both had this penciled in as a loss to start the year, maybe even pinned in as a loss to start the year. But this was embarrassing. It was one of those where you're just like, all right, game over. And it's not the first time this year where we've sat there at the half and gone, damn, now I have to watch the second half. I mean, literally felt like a spring game. Like where you watch the first half because you're trying to pick out things, between like Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway and what's going on. And then you get to the second half and they have like the celebrity guys running out on the field doing stupid stuff. And, the fourth string quarterback and defense end. Now, granted, Florida had their third string quarterback in there the entire game. So maybe that's why it felt like a spring game. But it was just ugly, man.
When,
And
when the Twitter debate started on, well, should we turn to Clay Millen? I'm like, I think I texted you at one point. I'm like, we are in hell right now. This is
I
not
mean,
good.
look, in 2013, Florida had a similar season, right, where the quarterbacks went down. Now, the difference there is Florida was winning games when Jeff Driscoll went down with a broken ankle, and then won a few games with Tyler Murphy at quarterback, and then Murphy went down, and all of a sudden we were living the Skylar Morhenweg experiment or experience, and it was pretty miserable. There's plenty of experience at Florida running it, or at least recent experience at Florida running into the third string quarterback and it being an issue. Certainly, there have been games where Jacoby Brissett was in there and was not very good when Florida had him in there when he was young. So I don't blame Aiden Warner for this, and quite honestly, it's hard to blame Billy Napier for having two quarterbacks who've been injured. At the same time, two quarterbacks who were injured had nothing to do with you giving up 10 yards per play in the first half. Sarkisian made them look like fools, and that's the. There were some people, not me certainly, but there were some people after that Georgia game talking about, well, that was close in the fourth quarter. The gap is closing. And one of the things I pointed out was, well, it was the interceptions that kept it close. If you look at the underlying stats, Georgia actually whipped Florida in this one. Now, you can say Lagway went out early and maybe Florida would have been able to win it. And certainly Florida had an early lead because of the turnovers in that one. But Georgia was the better team and it wasn't particularly close in my
Well,
mind.
it
And
got
and
down it got down to 14 and a half on the spread, right? Before the game. And it was a 14-point game. I mean, it was like it ended up where a lot of people thought it was going to be.
Now,
But
I will say that a 14-point spread is the narrowest spread that Florida's had with Georgia in the last few years. But in some
yeah,
ways, that's because maybe Georgia's come back to the pack a little bit with the expansion of the SEC with Oklahoma and Texas, and this game against Texas specifically. We have seen where Florida really stands when it comes to the gap with the upper echelon of the SEC. And
yeah,
honestly, we've seen that all year, right? A&M is one of the better teams in the SEC.
yeah.
They demolished Florida. Georgia, one of the better teams in the SEC, won by 2 touchdowns. And Texas, probably the best team in the SEC, just eviscerated Florida.
Right.
And if it's not Texas who's the best team in the SEC, I would say it's Ole Miss, at least with the advanced statistics. Ole Miss is a really good team, and we're going to see what happens in a couple of weeks
Yeah,
when
good thing
when
we're
when
not
Lane
playing
comes
them.
to
Good thing we're not playing them this year,
when
right?
Lane comes to town. So
Yeah.
look, I
We'll
mean,
see them in a couple weeks.
I'm gonna say what I always say, man. We only get 12 of these. Maybe we get a 13th because I do think the story is a little bit different against LSU this week. But we only get 12 of these, and so you got to enjoy it. And you know, my we're going to enjoy the tailgate, Max and I, this weekend irrespective of what the result is. But hopefully, for Max's sake, he can get another win. He was there for the Utah win a couple years ago. He was there for the FSU loss last year, and had to hear all those a-holes walking out doing their tomahawk chant. So hopefully this year he gets to yell, "It's great to be a Florida Gator" as we're
All
walking down
right,
the
so Max is
concourse.
on the hot seat. It's his third year. There's no excuses. That's what
It
you're
is
saying.
seriously.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. He's got
Got
a 500 record, so his record's
it.
better than Billy Napier thus far.
Yeah. Yeah, hey,
See if he can keep it.
I know I'm very much like you where it's like, hey, 12 games, enjoy the season, but let's be real. Part of the reason we tell ourselves that right now, it's been a rough decade, man. It's been a rough decade, and we just want to appreciate the football. We both are giant football fans, so we do appreciate the football at the end of the day, but man, just to be so remotely, the word I've been using all season is just non-competitive in these games that matter. These, but like you, Miami, A&M, you got Tennessee. You show up and compete. Okay, good. You show up and compete. You probably should have won that one. You made too many mistakes. Georgia, you get your doors blown off when it matters deep in the fourth, even though you close it down, even though you fought hard. And that what was fun. That's what was funny about the narrative that Palmer was pushing so hard against Texas about how hard these guys are fighting. It's like, hey, look, you look over at Boston College quarterback that beat Florida State earlier in the season, has a good first few weeks of the year. Castellanos gets benched, he quits, he walks out. There's a lot of that in college football, so there really is something to getting guys to stick around, getting them to compete, getting them to play hard. You know, they talked about last week 70% of our NIL money is tied up in this freshman and sophomore class. These guys are young guys, they're hungry players, they're looking to get in there and play. But let's have the conversation about competing when we're 20-20 in the fourth quarter against Georgia. Not when it's 42-0 in the third quarter, man. I don't want to hear about that in that moment. And that's the part that's a little frustrating is we have these little glimmers and little bright spots that people try to extrapolate into something, and it's pretty consistent at the when it goes final, the message is consistent. When we step on the field against top tier teams, we are not close, not remotely close. Now, Lagway coming in, does Lagway give you a better shot? Sure, but top to bottom as a program right now, it shouldn't be entirely dependent on one guy. It shouldn't be entirely dependent on one guy. It should be deeper than that. And in year three here, and that's what like I came in. We talked about last week. If Napier ends up going 6-6 or 7-5 or whatever, like does that? That's kind of where we expected him to go, or 5-7. He's within a game of expectations, right? Like, and I asked how you felt about that last week. The thing that I would have said coming into the season with the expectations that we're probably about a 6-6 ball club, give or take a game or two either way, is what do those losses look like? Are you hanging in there? Are you fighting? Like, look, that Tennessee loss. I'm still mad about some of the calls. I'm still mad about how that game went in a lot of ways. But there's a winner and a loser every week, right? And Florida, as long as you're not consistently on the losing end of those close games, okay. We typically are on the consistent end of the losing side here the last few years in those close moments when it matters. But there hasn't been that many close moments in big games over the last few years to even talk about. The losses this year are terrible. They're terrible. And that's what like at some point look, I'll even let's throw the Texas game out. You could throw it out with the third string quarterback too. Bad break against Georgia. All right. But do we have a story every week? There's a story every week to explain this away. I don't know. At some point, you got to look at the end results, and the end results just aren't even close right now.
So are we talking about the vote of confidence? Is that where we're going at this
Yeah,
point?
well, I'm
I think
kind of
it's
leading it. I'm leading it there. That's where we're going. So
so
Scott,
so so
I was
here.
going to turn it over to you for a couple minutes.
All right. So yes, the team stinks. I'm glad that they all play hard. I've been making this joke to you behind the scenes. I don't know if I said it on the podcast yet, but there was that article that came out in the Gainesville Sun that talked about the janitor being pleased that everything was cleaned up behind the scenes, and that these guys were all choir boys. And I'm like, that's great. Let's go win some football games.
Yeah.
And it's great that they're not transferring out, but it doesn't matter. You're still 4-5. Like the whole point of the enterprise is to win football games, or at least that's what the whole point's supposed to be. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the priority at the University of Florida right now. I think they've illustrated that, given the vote of confidence that Scott Stricklin gave. And look, there's a lot of other stuff going on too, right? You've got the interim president and Dr. Fox who took over for Ben Sass. You've got Scott Stricklin who is under some fire as maybe
No
not just
comment. No comment on Title IX
what
investigation,
he's
bro.
not feeling golden about the situation
No,
that's
no
going on.
comment. No comment.
I mean, when you got your coach allegedly stalking people, that's college age co-eds, that's not the best thing in the world, obviously. So, the question there is, are you just sort of holding on because you're going to let the next athletic director make this decision? And then you got Billy Napier, who, has his third string quarterback eating ice cream until he finally needs him. And all of those things. Again, it may be true that your third string quarterback gets very few reps, but you don't have to come out and tell everybody that your third string quarterback
But
isn't getting any reps.
you're
Like
I know
there,
you're joking about the PR on that, but in reality, most programs in America, you're down to your third string. That's going to be a rough moment unless you're Cardell Jones coming in
yeah,
and
but
win
again,
like three games at the end of the
yes, but again,
2014 season. But
well, so
it's
I go back to the same thing that you said earlier, and this really is my biggest argument against Napier, is it's always something. It's either we got two guys on the field with the same number, or, well, we're going to play this guy one out of every three drives. Well, he's only the most explosive player in the whole damn team, and we're going to play him one out of every three
right.
drives. And, so or, well, we lost our guy to injury. Okay, well, that's fine. Oh, we're going to go downfield more often this year with Mertz. But then when you go downfield, it doesn't work because that's not Mertz's strength. It's, oh, we're going to embrace culture. Well, that's fine, except that now you don't have the horses that are necessary when things happen. And then, oh, well, we've got all these injuries. Well, okay, that's the whole point of recruiting. The whole point. And now look, at quarterback, I get it, but you know, lots of teams are struggling with linebackers and defensive backs who are down and those sorts of things. Is Florida maybe a little bit harder hit this year? Perhaps, but that also brings up the fact that Florida's strength and conditioning program has been underwhelming over the last few years as well. So it's always something. And
Right.
here's what I'll say. I think Charlie Strong is a great guy. I think Charlie Strong deserved everything he got in terms of the job at Louisville. I think he deserved to get the job at Texas, but I think Charlie Strong proved that he was not the coach at Texas, not the coach to bring Texas back. He goes 6-7, 5-7, 5-7. Then they bring in Tom Herman, who recruited big time, but still 7-6, 10-4, 8-5, 7-3. And after 2020, they said, a top 20 program isn't good enough. Then they bring in Sark. He goes 5-7, 8-5, 12-2, and 8-1. And so there's always this argument, and you've made it with me as well, is, well, we don't want this constant turnover because that might impact things. And it does, right? So Sark goes 5-7 in his first year. Herman goes 7-6 in his first year. Charlie Strong goes 6-7 in his first year. Like in that first year, you definitely see that sort of drop back. But does Florida want to be where Texas is? And if Florida wants to be where Texas is, then it's pretty clear at this point that Billy Napier's not getting you there. So all you're doing by giving him this 2025 vote of confidence is, I guess, getting a few more signings for the 2025 recruiting class. Maybe that gives some guys in the portal who are only going to hop here for a year or two anyway to hop in. It is giving you the best opportunity to win with DJ Lagway at quarterback. But that's all it's giving you. And you're going to have to hit on everybody. And even then, you're facing the exact same thing Florida State faced this year when Jordan Travis left along with all the transfers. And now they have this giant void and they're sitting there at 1-8. And what I worry about is that you get a year next year where DJ Lagway plays really well. Florida goes 10-2. Billy Napier gets an extension. And then you're staring at that, 3-9, 2-10, 1-11 year that Florida State is, going, oh God, what did we do? We mortgaged our future in order to win now. Now look, flags fly forever. So if Florida State had gotten into, if Travis doesn't get hurt last year, Florida State's in that playoff, they have a shot to win the national title. I think if you'd asked most Florida State fans before last year, Would you have taken last year's season if it means you're going to have to go through this season? I think they would have said yes. So there is that aspect to it, right? Is you're potentially giving yourself the possibility of having Florida State's 2023 season with DJ Lagway and a bunch of transfers in here. Unfortunately, when you do that, though, you're also putting yourself in a situation where you're probably going to have Florida State's 2024 season as well. Now, maybe it's not as high in 2020, maybe Florida isn't able to match what they were able to do in 2023. Maybe Florida isn't as bad as they are in 2024 in that spectrum, but you're still riding that sine wave. You're not Texas, you're not Alabama, you're not Georgia. And to me, that's the goal. The goal is to be Texas, Georgia, Alabama, one of those teams. You're not going to get there with Billy Napier, but you know what? They've made the decision. And so one of the things that I've sort of resigned myself to is that I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to say, here's what I think Napier should do given what they're asking him to do. But we talked a lot in the magazine. I wrote a couple of articles where I was talking about the moral hazard. I wrote something about the Jets GM, a guy named Mike McCagnon years ago, where he went out and went on a spending spree, just a bender before the season started. And then they even fired him before the season started. But it absolutely killed the Jets cap. And he knew he was killing the Jets cap, but he didn't care because if the Jets didn't win that year, McCagnon was getting fired anyway.
Mhm.
So there was no incentive for him to hold back at all. And what you've kind of done at this point is you've made Billy Napier sit in that exact same situation. Is there's no reason for him to hold back at all, which means, if they're saying that they're going to use the $26 million that they saved in buyout money to go raid the portal, you're going to spend $26 million in the portal. The question is it going to be spent on players who can bring you a national championship with DJ Lagway at quarterback? That will be the question. But, look, everybody's going to praise the effort. Everybody's going to praise the culture. But the minute you start spraying $26 million around, that culture is going to be exactly what Napier's been sort of warning about, right? I mean, he came out initially and said this is a talent acquisition business. And then maybe 6 months later said, we're not going to get in bidding wars for guys. Well, they've basically said they're going to get in bidding wars for guys now, which means that culture that you're talking about is going to change, which is why I think going and why I have always said going the culture route is not the way to go, that you have to go the talent route. And do you want guys who are good culture, good teammate, all that sort of stuff? Absolutely. But are there five-star guys out there who are good for your culture? Sure, there are. And also, nobody leaves in the middle of the season when you're making a national championship run. And so, one of the ways to prevent guys from leaving is to have a great culture where when you struggle and you go 4-4 or 4-5, nobody leaves. But one of the other ways to make sure nobody leaves is go 12-0. And I prefer that method of keeping players in the fold, but obviously Scott Stricklin felt differently. I don't know that it's a coincidence that the vote of confidence was released the day before the Golden article came out with the alligator, but certainly an interesting week in Gator Nation last week. And then, like you said, the all-time meme with Stricklin with his sunglasses on the side line with the 42-0 score in front of him, and the little quote on the left hand side saying Billy Napier will be the coach of the Florida Gators. He didn't actually say in 2025 either, which is one of those things that like I'm struggling with getting to acceptance, denial, anger, the 5 stages of grief. I'm having difficulty getting to acceptance because I'm not entirely sure what acceptance is, and I'm still holding out that little kernel of hope that maybe Lane Kiffin or Todd Monken or Ryan Day or Dan Lanning or somebody's going to come available and a different decision will be made. But it is what it is at this point. We kind of know. We know what the path's going to be, and that's what we're going to have to analyze over the next year. And hopefully. I mean, I've been saying all year, I just need some wins, man. Like if you're not going to give me the long-term hope, I need some wins. And Florida hasn't been able to give that to us this year, and so hopefully they're able to do that next year.
Yeah, overall, I'd say the bright spot of the season is confirming that DJ Lagway looks like he's everything we wanted him to be, and maybe then some. Like you've said this before, and I love the quote. Like this is a guy that could be one of those bronze statues outside of the swamp one day if things go right, and he absolutely has the ceiling to get to that point. But we don't find that out unless, like, for certain, unless Graham Mertz takes an awkward jump and busts a knee, like blows out his knee. It's you can't even give him credit for that this year. That's the tough part. Is like it happened because of injury that we got to see Lagway a couple times, right? He got injured early on. Get to see him. He's enough of a spark where he gets some playing time, earns some playing time, and by midseason, there's another injury. He gets the starting gig. But watching the type of offense we've watched three quarterbacks in this offense now. There's only one that makes it run the way it does when he's in there. And they saw this in practice. And so it just I guess like part of the critique when Mullen was leaving was we watched the Emory Jones situation in Richardson where yeah, it's the young guy, but it was the guy one guy clearly had more of a spark in him than the other and had that potential for the big plays. I'm not sure, Will, what other point of optimism you could draw from this season other than the fact that maybe you've seen some young players make some plays here and there, but inconsistently. No one's been consistent week to week. There's been a couple of good additions in the portal. They seem to have done better in the portal this season than they did last season. There's a couple, few more MIA. So it's tough, man. It's tough, and that's why I think at some point when you look at it, the recruiting. You have to think the recruiting has absolutely suffered because of the conditions right now and because of the uncertainty. So maybe Stricklin offering that vote of confidence allows the recruiters to go out and double down and say, look, we're going to be here next year. And with the portal, come play at Florida. We're going to get you in. You're going to play early, whatever they got to say to get a kid in on campus at some point or however it works now. Salvage this recruiting class, get something in there, and then go hard after the portal window. Okay, cool vision. I think we're all telling that to ourselves. I'm not sure why we haven't done that previously, but I think last year everyone thought we were going to go hard in the portal window, and we got a couple decent ones, and the rest, what are they doing? What are we doing with
So
it? So
so that's a little bit unfair. I think Florida's been pretty successful in the portal when you look at it overall. Triquez Bridges been very, very good. Pup Howard been very, very good. I think
a lot of
certainly the
guys who
wide.
have been expected to contribute have been either injured or just not contributing
Well,
to.
but when you talk about Badger and DK, they're both in
Yep,
through the transfer
those are the
portal.
good
So,
ones.
I mean, I guess the question I have is, and this is something that I'm sure you and I will look into at some point, is what do we think an acceptable, I guess, productivity rate is for guys in the transfer portal? Because if you look overall at the level that Billy Napier is recruiting, you would expect about a 20% conversion rate of his recruits into stars. And the problem with that is what you end up with is you end up with over 22 players. If only 20% of them and he's only brought in like 20 players every recruiting class. He hasn't been bringing in 25. So out of those 20, you would expect 20% or four to be like solid starters, right? Guys who end up drafted in the NFL. That's kind of what you end up with is about 20%. Now, DJ Lagway and LJ McCray are on the high end. Those are guys who are like 60 to 70 percenters in terms of being NFL guys who end up getting drafted. I think they've hit with Lagway. I think we can already say that. So the issue that I have is okay, I think Badger and DK are NFL players. I think they've showed that they're going to be NFL players. I think Pup Howard probably going to be an NFL player. I think you look at a guy like Bridges, he's probably going to have some sort of future there. So in terms of like in the portal, I think they're hitting at a much higher rate than they have in recruiting overall. But still, they're 87th overall in yards per play on defense. They have not been good. And, they
And,
had
and
that.
and they're good players, Will. Some of these guys are good players that you're naming. I like Pup too, so this isn't really about Pup, but I mean even like DK's a good receiver. Is he a huge difference maker week to week? He'll have a few plays here and there. Is he that type of guy?
I mean,
Or
he went 5 for 95
you
the other
talk
day
about
against Texas, and
yeah,
no one else had more than like 13 yards receiving.
he's had a couple moments, but is he that guy that you can rely on week to week, like as a top tier contributor? I don't think I've seen that week to week from him. He's had some good plays, he's had some good returns. I think I'm not trying to put DK down in any way. I think DK's
Mhm.
having a nice season. Maybe that's a
So
bad
I want to
example
go back.
to
I
build
want to
this
go.
argument on,
No, no,
but
no. I want to go back to something you said, which is that, we wouldn't have known that DJ Lagway was the future without Graham Mertz going down with an injury. And I think you could say the same thing about Triquez Bridges, is we wouldn't have known that he was a solid player if Asa Turner and DJ Douglas had stayed healthy. But Asa Turner and DJ Douglas were bad. Well, I mean, Asa Turner only played like a half a game against Miami, but DJ Douglas was bad for like 3 or 4 games before finally they decided to make a switch there. So, you think even back to last year where Adam Mihalik was the kicker for the first couple of games until it just became
Right.
obvious that he was bad and they brought in Trace
By the
Mack
by the way,
and
that
he
became
wouldn't.
obvious in 2022 though. That wasn't
Well,
something that needed to carry into 2023, but that's another point.
but again, so the criticism of Napier in most cases has been that he has been extraordinarily slow to adjust when adjustments have been necessary. And I remember I wrote, I guess this was probably 2 years ago. It was right after, right after. No, I guess it was this last recruiting season after Florida's recruiting class fell apart at the finish line. I used a Lane Kiffin quote, and it was "Adapt or Die." Was the quote that was what Kiffin posted on early signing day last year was a tweet that just said "Adapt or Die." And that fundamentally is the thing that I think will be the undoing for Billy Napier is that he has been so slow to adapt in these different things. It's great that Florida has all this money now to go after the transfer portal. The problem is that you've now gotten to a point where everyone is dedicating resources to the transfer portal. So now you have to overpay. Like they're not finding a market edge. They're just saying, well, we're going to flood the market with cash. Well, what is that? What happens when you flood a market with cash? As we've seen for the past 3 or 4 years, maybe 6 years now, inflation. You start seeing the prices go up. And so you get less for your money as that goes. So $26 million isn't going to go as far as it isn't going to go as far in 2025 as it did in 2022. So like Texas A&M when Nick Saban was sitting there going, "Oh, those guys just bought that number one recruiting class." Yeah. So like they found an edge. They realized that they could go out and spend real money and bring in the best recruiting class that was out there. They are now starting to reap those benefits. A lot of the depth of that class. Now, some of the guys like Walter Nolan and some other and Evan Stewart have left, but the depth of that class is contributing to what they're doing this year. And um, that fundamentally, I think that slowness to adjust along with the inability to really cast a coherent and compelling vision. Those are the two things that really I think are going to be the things that we look back on and say, assuming that Napier doesn't work out long term, that was the death of him, is that you can't like you can't wait until everyone's desperate to then go, give me money to help make this thing better. It's like the money has to come first, the recruiting has to come first, and then the wins will come. That is how college football has worked for years and years and years. And just because the mechanism of player acquisition has changed does not mean that the general rule of player acquisition that you need players and you need lots and lots of players stacked up one on top of each other in order to have an effective program. That doesn't mean that truth has stopped being true. All that being said, if Florida was just a little bit better on game day, like it's not like Florida is devoid of talent. They've got like the 14th or 15th most talented roster in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. They have a five-star quarterback who has the potential to be a star. When you have those two things, you shouldn't be struggling to get to 500. And that fundamentally is the other real issue here is that, I go and I look at this Texas game even and I go, look, third string quarterback, I get it. Struggling on offense, I get it. But they were so fundamentally unsound on the defensive side of the ball. Just, I mean, the first touchdown for Texas, complete busted coverage. Texas ran a switch release. The outside receiver pushed in, and the inside receiver went to the outside. They run a switch release, and Florida completely loses it. That's like, I mean, you need to understand what your responsibility is on a switch release by the time you get to game 9. And and this was Bridges and this was Castell. I don't know who's at fault. I suspect it's Castell, but I don't know that to be true because I don't know how they teach it. In fact, I worry that they don't teach it because it seems to be that is an easy way to get people open against the Florida defense. But you need to know how to, just like the offensive line needs to know how to pick up a stunt, the defensive backs need to know their responsibilities on a switch release. Florida doesn't know it. Texas has a guy wide open, and Quinn Ewers, who has struggled all year long, has a guy who's open by about 45 yards downfield, hits him for a touchdown, and he's off and running. And you give a quarterback with Ewers' level of talent confidence, And all of a sudden, things look completely different. In fact, he didn't pull the trigger on a play where he got sacked on the first drive, drives Texas back. Texas misses a field goal. Florida really got a gift there in some ways because they brought a blitz. I think when you look from the back end, I actually think Texas had a guy open and Ewers just didn't let the ball go. But Florida finally started leaving guys so wide open that Ewers was like, "I'll chuck that thing up there because there's no risk." And so the blown coverages, the poor tackling, the the schematic issues that they've had, the fact that they were getting torched on big play after big play after big play and still decided to blitz more. They strategically decided to blitz more against Georgia. They kept that up against Texas even after they were getting blown out of the water. So look, Florida's defense has been bad under Billy Napier every year that he's been there. This defense maybe is slightly better, but it's not good. And so you've got a bad
especially
defense with
not
a third.
against great competition,
Yeah, so
against good competition.
well,
Yeah.
but even that, just FBS competition in general, they're 87th overall in the country. So yeah, they played pretty well against Kentucky. Yeah, they played pretty well against Tennessee. Yeah, they played pretty well against UCF. But Nico, Vandergriff, and KJ Jefferson are
Not
not
good.
Carson
Yeah.
Beck, Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, and even Garrett Nussmeier. And Nussmeier is somebody who has some weaknesses, but is Florida's defense equipped to exploit those is going to be the story in that game, and I hope they are. This is one that Florida needs to get. I think Florida, just from a program perspective, really kind of needs a bowl game and an opportunity to get above 500. I think that goes a long way in terms of what Florida might be able to turn into next year. But this is the one because I don't think they're getting Ole Miss, and oh my God, if they lose to Florida State, all hell might break loose.
So 5 losses, Will. 5 losses for this Gator team. All 5 of the losses are ranked in the top 12 of the college football playoff ranking. Uh, Georgia's the only one that's actually not in the field because of the qualification with the top G5 as the fifth auto bid. So Boise State would jump Georgia to get in the field, but Georgia's technically ranked number 12. So all 5 losses are currently 5 of the 12 playoff teams right now. Any credence to that, or is it just you look at it, it's just a non-competitive product in those moments? You're not supposed to be non-competitive with these teams. One thing to lose, it's one thing to not have an edge in a particular season. But I mean, we're racking up losing streaks here, Will. Like LSU, we're about to step on the field with LSU. We haven't beaten LSU since 2018. It's 2024, man. It's 2024. Like the losing streaks are piling up against some of these rivals, and I I don't know how much longer you can allow it to go at this rate. In year 3, there should be more progress than this, and so I know I feel like Napier has gotten a bad hand in a lot of respects, but you're also are you're also Florida. You're not supposed to. You're not. They're supposed to be worried about you. You're not supposed to be worried about all these other teams. They're supposed to be worried about you. And right now, we're just not putting that fear into anybody.
I mean, so I think when Georgia decided to replace Mark Richt with Kirby Smart, there was risk inherent in making that decision because Richt was winning 9, 10, 11 games a year. He'd won some SEC
Get to
championships.
Atlanta, yeah.
There he had beaten Florida at least a few times. It was
Mhm.
pretty clear that Richt was not going to take them to a national championship. But I think you could make some arguments that, oh, if things had gone the right way, or if a few things had gone his way, instead of playing in the Sugar Bowl against Hawaii, he's out there playing for a national championship. Like you could make some of those arguments. And I think Richt is a pretty good football coach. Um, you can't make those arguments for me in this case, right?
Mhm.
Yes, Florida has been unfortunate that they've had to play 5 teams in the top 12 and they've lost all of those games. But that's sort of the same thing when people are like, "Oh, well, they're 15th in recruiting or 12th in recruiting." I'm like, "Yeah, but they're the 7th in the SEC." Like, and that has ramifications when you're the seventh ranked team in the SEC. Not necessarily because, you'll lose to every team that's ranked in front of you, but because you have to play those teams week after week after week after week. I mean, Florida's also got a tough hand in that they got Georgia coming off a bye, they got Texas coming off a
Texas,
bye, and they're going to have Ole Miss
Ole
coming off a
Miss,
bye
yep.
too. So that's not necessarily all that kind for Florida either. But again, if you want to be a championship program, you have to go beat some top 10 teams. Like Georgia right now has had three, I think they've played three top 10 teams on the road. They're 1-2. And so even the mighty Georgia Bulldogs, when you put them on the road against top tier talent, are going to struggle from time to time. They even struggled against Florida, right? So the there are there are cycles even within programs that are considered elite. But Georgia is sitting there at what, 7-2? And still has a path to the playoff even though they've struggled. Florida, even though they've struggled, has zero path to a playoff, and we're talking about whether they have the ability to whether they have the ability to like hold on to their head coach. So they're just in different places. The programs are in different places, and we can sit here and argue about whether it's good enough all day long. The answer is no, it's not good enough. The question of is Napier going to be able to turn it around? I think the answer is doubtful, but he's back for 2025, at least given all the stuff that people have talked about. And so I'm at a point now where I've made it clear this is where I'm at. I've made it clear that this is not this is not ideal for the program long term, but it doesn't matter. It is what it is at this point. I'm still going to root for my team. I still want him to win,
Right.
and I hope Napier can turn it around. But like I said, a nightmare scenario is like a 10-2 year next year where you don't make the playoff, but it's enough to get an extension and then the bottom falls out. I think that's still a realistic scenario and something that we need to take into account. But look, I mean, this isn't Jim Harbaugh, who won 10 games and couldn't beat Ohio State, had one bad year, then they made him take a pay cut. And then all of a sudden he figured out how to cheat and could beat Ohio State and win national titles and made it to the playoffs a bunch of times. It was like that's not and Harbaugh, I mean Harbaugh won with the 49ers. Harbaugh won with Stanford. Like it's not like Harbaugh had no pedigree. Now Harbaugh's winning with the Chargers. So that guy's a damn good football coach. I think the comparison, I think Charlie Strong is actually a really good comparison here, which is Charlie Strong was a really good guy, waited a really long time to become a head coach, paid his dues building up through the ranks, was very successful at Louisville as the head coach there. And so you're like, yeah, this should translate to Texas. And then he even recruited pretty well at Texas when he came in there. And it just didn't work for whatever reason. And Charlie Strong hasn't gotten another Power Five job since then as a head coach, and part of the reason is because of the track record that he put on at Florida, so or at Texas. So I think that's actually an apt comparison, and I think it sort of sets the expectation that that you can punt on recruiting classes and you can punt on building your program by changing coaches, but you can all and you can harm those things by changing coaches, but you can also punt on the recruiting classes and punt on building your program by keeping them. And given the apathy I'm seeing in the program and hearing from people that I'm talking to, um, I, I I don't anticipate that this recruiting class is going to be anything to write home about. And if you have another bad year next year or another mediocre year next year, now you've punted on two straight recruiting classes when you make a change and bring a new guy in. And that new guy is going to have to going to have the same challenges as he would have had coming in this year. Again, but it's got to be the right new guy. And I think that's sort of the question. And maybe it's the question that Scott Stricklin came to is he put out some feelers, had a couple of lunches and breakfasts with Jimmy Sexton. Sexton said, which client do you want? Strickland told him, this is the client I want. The client he wanted wasn't available. And so, hey, we're going to bring him back because that guy that we want isn't there. And again, I don't know, but that would be the only thing that's reasonable is you sit there and go, I don't want another Jim McElwain where we made a move on Will Muschamp and McElwain was the guy who was available even though there might have been better guys available the year before, the year after. I think you got to make a move when you see the guy you can make a change to who's not
I
great.
don't know what the state of Florida did to Jimmy Sexton, but he's got the two top programs in the state are just on the hook for what a combined where we at so about $100 million in payouts if they fire their coaches. So Jimmy Sexton owns us right now, man. It's
All
not a
right.
good it's not a good situation.
Yeah.
It's not a
You want
good
to talk? You want to
situation.
talk LSU so we can stop talking about this because I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Well, and by the way, FSU's 1-9. FSU is 1-9 this season, so not a good situation over there. So,
See, I
all
could
right.
take joy in that if I knew there was going to be a change coming. Since there's no change. In fact, they're stuck in it. So just from a financial perspective, so it's amusing, but we're doing it to ourselves.
LSU on the surface, 6-3 team with an explosive offense at times. The defense has struggled still. It has not been a great unit. I think it's better than last season, but it's not been great in the spots where they need it to be. Six consecutive wins after falling on opening night to Southern Cal, including a 3-point win on the road at South Carolina, which, by the way, they're playing some good football right now, and a walk-off win in overtime against Ole Miss in Death Valley a few weeks back. But the last three halves of football have been ugly. You were up 17-7 at Texas A&M going into halftime. Since then, the Tigers have been outscored 74-19. Alabama rushed for 312 yards last week, led by quarterback Jalen Milrose, 185 yards and four touchdowns. Uh, 3-2 in the conference. LSU, they're still a long shot for the SEC championship game, but they're technically in it, so they have plenty to play for. Will, I think we're going to get a focused group. Like I said, this is not a team whose season's over by any stretch, so they need some help, but I don't think we're going to get a distraction coming into the swamp. Um, 4.5 point favorite coming in here, LSU. And really, if the Gators are going to pull the upset, first and foremost, Lagway must play. There's talk of it. I think it's I feel more optimistic than not, but we'll see how it goes. I still think that's a tough injury to come back from so quickly. Um, but I do think this is also the best shot at winning here. If you look at between now and next week with Ole Miss, I would love to see him play, especially after what we saw last week. The defense, I think they must keep that LSU game in at bay, their running game at bay. We've seen that at times this year with LSU where the running game has struggled. Keep that at bay and make Garrett Nussmeier beat them because I'll tell you what, there's times this year where Nuss has been very good, and when he's on, he's on. But there's also times where he makes a ton of mistakes. 9 interceptions in the last 5 games, uh, it- including 5 in the last 2 outings. So, can the Florida secondary step up like they did against Georgia, take advantage of a few errant passes, or are we going to be looking at something like we saw last week against Texas?
Yes, I don't think we'll be looking at what we saw last week for Texas. I think Florida's going to struggle. So if you look overall, you know, LSU is a good offensive team. So they're 25th overall in yards per play, 6.2. Florida's giving up 5.8 yards per play, which ranks 87th in the country. So somewhere between 5.5 or 6 yards per play is what we should expect from Florida. And that's like 33, 34 points is probably what we're looking at Florida giving up. Now, the caveat there is well, there's two caveats. You mentioned the Lagway needing to play, and I think Lagway on crutches might be a better option than what we've seen so far. Aiden Warner has a QB rating of 68.3 in the two games that he's played in. Now, granted, he's played against Georgia and Texas, so that's two of the better defenses in the country, but still 68.3, 4.6 yards per attempt isn't going to get the job done. Lagway is averaging 11.6 yards per attempt, and even if you remove the Sanford game, he's still averaging almost 9 yards per attempt. So elite quarterback play from DJ Lagway when he's been in there from an efficiency standpoint, which means you get explosives. And so I did this the other day. I looked up Florida's number of explosives. They have 21 or they have 41 explosives on the year, 20 plus yard plays. DJ Lagway is responsible for 21 of them. They have 12 plays that have gone for 40 plus yards. DJ Lagway is responsible for 11 of them. So when you think about Florida's offense looking different, when you think about Florida's defense moving down the field, look, Graham Mertz played a lot of snaps early in the year and was not generating explosive plays anywhere at the level that DJ Lagway was. And so if they can harness any of that, that'll be great. The other part of this is Nussmeier. You mentioned he's got a QB rating of 139.5. My stat, yards above replacement, which takes both running and throwing into account for quarterbacks from an efficiency standpoint. He's negative 0.13, so just slightly below average. But the thing I really want to look at, so there's a few things that I think you can look at for Nussmeier is one, against Southern Cal, his QB rating was 156, then 195 against Nicholls State, 131 against South Carolina, 162 against UCLA, and 161 against South Alabama. The last four games, 110, 125, 119, and 110. So the last four games, his QB rating has been bad. It hasn't just been interceptions because he didn't throw any interceptions against Arkansas, but he's thrown he has thrown seven interceptions in those games. But his QB rating's been around 110, which is just terrible. I mean, that's bad. So then you start asking, well, why is that? And one of the things you'll note if you look, and this is something I'm going to have in the preseason in the preview article that I put up, is his QB rating deep on 20 plus yard plays is 137.1. 11 to 20 yard throws is 131. So he's a below, like the overall average quarterback rating in FBS is 148. He's below average on throws that are going 11 to 20 yards downfield and 20 plus yards downfield. If you look overall, if you look overall, just anything more than 10 yards, he's at 133.5 is his quarterback rating overall. And then he can't go to his left. So to his left, he's got a QB rating of 110, and anything over 10 plus yards, he's got a QB rating of 91. So I think what's happened is that defenses started to figure this out. And as they figured out that he's not going to beat him deep, and as they figured out that he's not going to beat him left, they've been able to shrink the field. And as you shrink the field, now you have opportunities for turnovers because you're doubling guys in the right spot, you're covering guys in areas where Nussmeier wants to throw, and you can start shrinking those zones because you don't necessarily have to cover deep outside to the left. He's not getting to either that guy in his progression, or he's just inaccurate when he throws that way. I mean, he's 2 of 19 on throws 20 plus yards downfield for 48 yards to his left. So you don't even have you don't want to play quarters coverage against these guys because you've got two guys in an area of the field where he's just not going to throw the ball. And so I think Florida, if they pay attention to these stats and if they look at the tendencies, have the ability to shrink the field for Nussmeier, make him beat them in a way he has not been able to beat Mississippi, in a way he hasn't been able to beat Arkansas, in a way he hasn't been able to beat Texas A&M, in a way he hasn't been able to beat Alabama. Force them to have to run the ball. And that is, you think about the injuries that Florida has. The injuries are on the defensive backfield. They are not up front. So guys like Des Watson, now they're a little bit up front now because Pup Howard is out, I think, with an ankle injury this week. So,
Yeah, Pump is up.
but the front four, like those guys are pretty healthy. You think about Cam Jackson and Caleb Banks and Des Watson and some of the younger guys as well. Those guys are all healthy. Slackman. So force them to run the ball. You should be able to keep the ball in front of you because Nussmeier's not hitting a bunch of big explosive plays, which is good because Florida's terrible at giving up explosive plays. I think they're ranked 123rd in the country, or 128th in the country, having given up 53 plays of 20 plus yards. So this is sort of the question is Nussmeier's been bad going deep. Florida's been bad covering deep. Can Nussmeier hit those deep throws? And if you think about the games where Florida has looked good defensively, it's been games where the quarterback has missed. So Nico missed a couple of deep shots where guys were running free down the field. Vandergriff had some times where he could have hit guys for first downs in open zones and just airmailed them. KJ Jefferson looked terrible whenever he had to throw the ball more than 5 or 6 yards downfield. And so Nussmeier is better than those guys, but he is not Carson Beck and he is not Quinn Ewers. And so if Florida doesn't bust coverages, like if you bust a coverage, he's going to hit it. But if they don't bust coverages, if they make him throw into tight windows, if they make him, if they understand that those windows need to shift in and to the right, then I think Florida's going to get a couple of turnovers. And you get a couple of turnovers, and now all of a sudden, if DJ Lagway's playing, you have an opportunity to keep it close, convert those into points. Obviously, if Aiden Warner's playing, I think this one's probably a blowout again, just because, I mean, there hasn't been much contribution from the quarterback position in the last game and a half. And I feel bad for Warner. Like he's been put in a situation that's pretty untenable. Any redshirt freshman who's the third string quarterback getting thrown into SEC games is going to struggle, and Warner has done that. But that's just sort of the reality, and it doesn't get any easier. You got LSU and Ole Miss on the horizon, so I suspect Lagway's going to play. He's definitely been more active in practice this week than he was last week. Last week, I think, was more of a smokescreen just to see if Texas had to prepare for somebody. Apparently, though, it deflated the rest of the team when they went out there and Lagway wasn't playing. So hopefully, and honestly, the other part of it is this is the game that Florida needs to get. If you look at EPA per play, EPA differential, all those sorts of things, LSU is actually pretty close to Florida overall in those underlying metrics, much, much closer than Ole Miss is. And so, Florida needs to get one of these next two and be able to pile on a Florida State win as well to get bowl eligible. And this is the opportunity. So I think even if he's not 100%, and even if he's got to sort of do this one gimpy. I think this is one where Lagway probably gives it a go because this is a game that Florida needs to get in order to achieve sort of the only goal left on the table.
Well, let's hope we do see DJ Lagway on Saturday. So LSU Tigers coming to the Swamp. Another challenge in a challenging portion of the schedule here. Will, real quick before we end tonight, college football playoff rankings. We'll cover these at the end of each episode for the next few weeks until the playoff is finalized here. Oregon, Miami, BYU, Texas, all in those top four spots. Miami drops to four after a loss to Georgia Tech. Texas at two, BYU three. Of course, for those of you who are still learning the college football playoff bracket format, the automatic bids for the second round into the quarterfinals go to the conference champions of the Power Four conferences. So those are the projected champions at the moment. But on the weekend before Christmas, the first round games will be played December 20th and 21st. Currently, they have number 12 Boise traveling to number 5 Ohio State. The winner plays Miami. Notre Dame in the 8-9 spot. They travel to Neyland to face Tennessee. The winner plays Oregon in one of the New Year's Bowl games. Ole Miss goes into the cold weather at Penn State for what could potentially be the greatest whiteout of all time. If you get a snow game there, the winner plays BYU. And Alabama would go up to Indiana to play the Indiana Hoosiers. Will, I know you spent some time in Bloomington growing up. Could you have ever imagined the Alabama Crimson Tide coming to town in December for a playoff game right before Christmas?
So I didn't spend any time in Bloomington growing up, at least when it came to the fall, because Indiana football was so bad. There was no way we were going down there. It's about an hour and a half from where I grew up, but my dad went there, so we would go down for stuff from time to time. Mostly though basketball, because I'm still a Hoosiers fan when it comes to basketball. Um, I'm so torn on this because these games are going to be fun to watch. They really are. But the fact that Notre Dame can lose to a directional school and still be sitting in the playoffs really bugs me. The fact that we're allowing Boise State or SMU or BYU into this, even though they haven't really played anybody, is bothersome. The fact that Georgia loses against two top 10 teams and falls out, and you get Miami who loses to Georgia Tech for the second straight year, and this year it didn't even take a ridiculous not kneeling to get the loss, which created like an awesome meme of the Georgia Tech fan pointing at the guy wearing the Miami shirt, but it means nothing. Miami, if they win out, is still going to get a first round bye, and it really means nothing because if Alabama beats Indiana and then goes like with the current configuration, if Alabama beats Indiana and plays Texas, are you telling me that Alabama is really that much worse than Ohio State in terms of like where Texas and Miami sit? Or if Notre Dame beats Tennessee, that Notre Dame is really that much worse than Ohio State and those sorts of things. Like, so I don't see a huge differentiator in terms of the 1 through 4 seeds. The bye is valuable. I think it completely devalues the championship games. I'm going to be fascinated to see. I don't think anybody will do it this year, but I'll be fascinated to see when you get a Joel Embiid did not play rest or did not play. What do they call it in?
Well, you are forfeiting a bye if you do that. If you do lose a conference championship game, you are playing an extra game in the playoffs, so there is some value to the conference
Yeah, but
championship.
if you don't play in the conference championship game, you get a bye too. Because
No,
the conference championship game If you're not playing in it, then you get a week off while
Right.
your opponent. So you get a bye, you
Well,
just then have to win an extra game.
okay.
Like
Well,
and I get it.
I'm
I
talking about
understand.
in the playoffs. You don't
No,
get
I
it by
know,
in the playoff, right?
I know what you're saying. So
Yeah.
to me, there's a disadvantage to making the conference championship game. If I look at this, because you've got Texas from the SEC, you've got Alabama from the SEC, you got Ole Miss from the SEC, and you got Tennessee from the SEC. So let's say Texas plays Ole Miss in the SEC championship game, and then Ole Miss loses and stays in the bracket but has to play again the next week. Well, making the SEC championship game was now a disadvantage for Ole
Well,
Miss
they will
because
get a bye.
Alabama.
They will get a bye in between because the SEC championship game is going to be the first week of December, and the playoff game is going to be December 20th. So
Yeah,
they'll get that bye in between.
but again, you get extra time off. The 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 special thing about college football has always been that every week matters. And that loss to Georgia Tech for Miami doesn't matter. And that drills home to me the thing that I struggle with. Now, on December 20th, when these games kick off, am I going to watch them am I going to leave the couch the entire day? No, I'm going to watch every minute of every one of those games, and those games are going to be awesome. It'll be like a holiday to have those playoffs, and having them at home is going to be awesome. But there's a trade-off here, and I think we need to be honest. There's a trade-off when it comes to
Well,
that.
let me
And
ask you this to push back on that argument. LSU comes to town to play Florida, and in any other year, the SEC West and SEC East, if that's still a configuration, Georgia's got the East wrapped up by Ole Miss and Alabama. They didn't play this year, so you can't say, but the West is usually wrapped up after the LSU Alabama game typically. So you got a mid-November game with two teams that are not would not be at the top of the East or West. Would that game mean much? Like I think there's like the big games mean more in the regular season, like in terms of like your Tennessee, Alabama, right, would have meant more in the previous configuration of college football. But the new one, I think there's a lot more games that actually have meaning on the schedule. If you chart it out and tie it to the playoff, you got a lot more teams in it. I think it's creating a lot more discussion. And then with the recent portal stuff where it seems to be there's more parity. We've talked about this in the SEC where the top of the league feels like they've come back to the pack. This is one of the most interesting college football seasons I can remember, aside from my weekly pain watching my own team. It is one of the more interesting college football seasons I can remember in a long time.
so I don't disagree with you. There's always going to be
That's called
intrigue.
agreeing. That's called
Well,
agreeing. Don't
no.
disagree.
So I'm not disagreeing with you that it's interesting and that the season has been interesting. What I'm saying is that we have lost the value of
Of a few
so
games, I agree. The
well no no
high
no
end value of a few games.
so here's the thing. So I watched the second half of Florida and Texas because I have to and I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yeah,
But
same.
I would have put that off to watch Miami, Georgia Tech to see what would have happened in that game if I had thought that it mattered even remotely. And the problem is I knew it didn't matter because I've looked at Miami's schedule and I know it's coming up. And unless they face plant a couple more times against teams of Georgia Tech's ilk, then they're going to be in the playoff regardless. And so that game meant nothing. Now, you can there will be games that mean more for other teams, but what it means to me now is that these elite teams where like one of my favorite moments in college football was I think it was Texas was in the Big 12 championship and Nebraska got them. And Nebraska came in like I don't know 8-3 or something like that. And they go in the Big 12 championship and beat Texas in that championship. I think Makovico was the fullback or something. This was years ago.
It was
And
the other way around.
was it?
Nebraska was the power, and Texas went in there. I think Makovic was Joel Makovica.
Yeah.
Ma and then the Texas coach, I think, was named John Malkovich, like the actor, I think.
I'm
That's
not,
why I'm getting torn up in my head. Yeah.
well, so
But
clearly it was a memorable moment for me because I can remember exactly what's
well,
going
the
on.
reason you
But
remember it is because it was a huge upset in '96 in the Big 12 championship game, and that was pivotal for Florida winning
Well,
the national title. That's probably why you remember it.
and how about Edgerrin James against UCLA years ago, where he just absolutely torched him? Or I can remember back in 2012 when USC was playing Notre Dame, and if USC had been able to pull off an upset in that game, and in fact there was a goal line stand for Notre Dame down at the end of the right at the end of the game, if USC had been able to pull an upset, then Florida would have played for the national championship that year. And we would have had all this change happen sooner because we would have had two SEC teams playing for the national championship before the Alabama LSU game that sort of changed it all. But I guess my point is so the total number of games that could impact the playoff, like or where it matters to a team, right? Where you lose a couple of games, you're like, well, we're still in it. That's all true. But what that means is that the first two games you lost didn't really matter. And so the do or die nature, like when Florida lost to Ole Miss in 2008, I can remember sitting on the floor after they missed the extra point, and then after Tebow got stopped on fourth down. I can remember sitting on the floor of the townhouse that we owned in Virginia and just like being completely stunned and realizing that probably meant that the best team I'd ever seen was not going to get to play for a national championship. And they put together an unbelievable run after that, but still needed some stuff to happen to get into the national championship game against Oklahoma that year. Now it happened, and Florida won the national championship, and so everybody's happy about that. But that game is memorialized with the Tebow plaque and all that sort of
Right.
stuff because that loss almost cost them a national championship. And now it would just be a blip on the way to a playoff appearance. And that to me is the fundamental difference here is that that game loses all significance. And maybe even the SEC
So,
championship game in 2006 against Arkansas loses all significance. The fake punt by Urban Meyer when he's deep in his own territory doesn't have anywhere near the significance because if it hadn't worked, oh well, you're still playing
so
in the playoff next
for
week.
championship teams, previous national championship level teams, I absolutely agree with this point. But what I'm saying is, like, you look at the Tennessee Georgia game this weekend, it's huge. Georgia lost two games. Any other season, their season's over. They're trying to play spoiler to one loss Tennessee. They're both battling for a playoff spot. That's a huge game in Athens. Penn State lost to Ohio State a couple weeks ago. Previous iteration, Big Ten East, Penn State's out of it probably. Ohio State's going, and Penn State's going to have a nice New Year's Six bowl. And hey, good try. You didn't beat the Buckeyes again. Hey, now you're jockeying for a home playoff spot potentially.
I
So
guess my point is that when one loss can make or break your year, then I have to watch every game until you get that one loss. And so Florida was there after the first game and after the third game. So, in a different iteration, maybe Florida pulls off the upset over Tennessee. Lagway doesn't get hurt and they beat Georgia. Maybe they actually decide to show up against Texas. And we're sitting here talking about a 7-2 team that has a shot at a playoff. Certainly. And there have been times in the past where some teams have lost a couple of games early in the year and then have been very, very good at the end. And you're like, I wonder what would have happened if they'd had sort of gotten off
yeah,
to a better start. But that's pretty rare. Usually the best teams come out and sort of establish themselves right off the bat. And I'm just somebody who like I have found myself watching less college football this year than I have in years past because other than wanting to watch Georgia, Florida State, Tennessee, LSU, and Alabama lose just for the sake of I want to see them lose, I haven't like I don't care what happens to Notre Dame. The only thing that I'm curious about in terms of Notre Dame is are they going to lose a game that'll keep them out of the playoff? And they lose that game to who was it? Northern Illinois.
hmm
And when it was like the second game of the year, and so I was sitting there snickering about it, and I watched that game, and I saw him lose that game, and I was like, oh, this will knock him out. And then I have to remind myself, no, that game didn't matter. Like they went out, and it won't matter. And I'm like, a loss to Northern
it
Illinois should
it
matter.
doesn't matter. It
You
doesn't
shouldn't be
matter
able to win.
yet. It doesn't
You
matter
shouldn't be able
yet.
to win you shouldn't be able to win the national championship and lose to Northern Illinois. Now, thankfully, I don't think Notre Dame has been tested, and when they get into the playoff, they're going to get spacked. But again, that's also my point. And the other thing that I'm really curious about once we actually get to the playoff is that with the 4-team playoff, the one versus four and the two versus three, when they were teams of significant differences in recruiting rankings
Hmm.
weren't even remotely
No,
close.
a lot of those playoff games weren't great. No.
And so like you'd get the Ohio State Georgia games like we got on New Year's that was fantastic. But you also get the Georgia TCU and the Georgia Michigan games, which were just complete blowouts. And when you get Indiana playing Alabama, or you get Boise State playing Ohio State, or you get BYU playing Ole Miss, I think you're going to have some of the same stuff that happens. And so, again, if
But you
you
know
want to
what?
go,
These are the second. I think this is the second bracket they've released. Like, I have a feeling we're going to see some Alabama Ohio State type of matchup or something. You're going to see some friendly TV matchups. I'm
you mean
pretty
that when
sure
Indiana loses to Ohio State, that one might be a one and you're done, and they'll throw those
that
guys
one will
out.
probably be a one and done.
And
Unfortunately
it
for the
turns out
Hoosiers.
that and it turns out then that as an Indiana, so if Ohio State loses to Indiana, I think that knocks Ohio State out. If
Oh,
Indiana
100%.
loses to
Should.
Ohio State, I think that probably knocks Indiana out.
Yeah.
So now we're back to the one game loss all of a sudden becomes really critical. And so all they've really done here in this entire endeavor is they have moved all the drama closer to the end of the season.
Right. So more games actually matter down the stretch.
Yeah, but what that means is none of the games matter at the start.
No, because you have to win to put yourself in the spot. As a team that's lost 5 games, I can assure you that our games have mattered to us not being in this conversation.
Yeah,
So
but we were never in the playoff conversation to begin with.
no, but it's a joy. But because the games matter, we lost. Like, if anything, it's still you got to put yourself in that spot. And I think like right now, Georgia's got 2 losses, but hey, they still control their destiny for the playoff. They win out, they're in. They like I don't see where they wouldn't be in. So I it's interesting. I love the old style of college football too, so it's an adjustment as well. But I do give me an SEC team playing in snow the week before Christmas. Give me that type of game. Ole Miss at
I
Penn State in a foot of snow. I would love to see it.
Well, so two things. We haven't had snow in Pennsylvania for the last 2 years, so don't bet on there being snow at Penn State.
Maybe
The other
that.
thing is, I'm
Yeah.
fully in favor of Penn State having a playoff game, just not on December 20th because I will be in Florida that week. Unfortunately, this year it won't match. So Penn State needs to get the home game next year, so that I can drive up to Happy Valley and go for whatever $1,000, whatever it's going to cost to
Have
go
you
to the.
been in the Happy Valley for a game?
I haven't. I keep waiting I will get up there at some point, but look at what I do on the weekends. Like I don't
Yeah.
like now the good news is the Big Ten game's always at noon. So
Oh, that's another can of worms.
I can scope that one out and then be ready for Florida's game at 7 o'clock that night. But no, I got connections up there at this point now since I've lived up here for a while. I will get up there at one point, but I always have to wait for the bye week. And then they're playing like Purdue. And I'm like, really? I don't want to go watch Penn State play Purdue. Like,
Mhm.
it's like going to the Horseshoe and watching Ohio State play Youngstown State. It's like, no
I've seen him
thanks.
play Purdue in the horseshoe, so I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
So you know that it was kind of like when Florida played Texas this week,
Yeah.
where at halftime you
I
just go,
saw
all right.
Purdue beat Ohio State in the horseshoe one time, I'm pretty sure. No.
Well, you're an
No,
Ohio
I
State
didn't
fan.
see
You're
that. I
you're
didn't
an
see that.
Ohio State fan too. So you have
Grew up with it, went to
uh,
school, was tested, wore the orange and blue.
was tested.
Yeah, they played Ohio State in a championship game. I went to the game. I sat in the Ohio State section where my orange and blue is the only one in there. I can find myself in the photo when you look at the field. I see me and my brother were the only 2 blue dots in an Ohio State section.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, ultimate. That's an ultimate test. Yeah,
All right,
playing
so we
national
will
championship
so
game.
we'll have the old man argument again next week when we go through the college football playoff, and you go, "I love
I think
this," and I'm
there's
like, "This
plenty. I think
sucks."
there's plenty of people I got mixed feelings on it too. But I think some of it, especially the first round, is really intriguing. It's the weekend before Christmas. I think people, if I think some of those games are going to be real solid. So I
I
think
mean,
it's gonna be fun to watch.
I will eat up the overall football that week. I mean, I have zero doubt that
Yeah.
that's how I will feel as I'm watching it. The issue I have is what it does to the stuff during the season. And look, I mean, we all knew this was going to happen. We knew that the early games were going to be devalued over the late games, and that you could lose to a Northern Illinois or a Kentucky or something like that. Like, look, I mean, if Georgia had lost to Kentucky last year, there's no way they're in the playoff. And granted, even with the 4-team playoff, the games later in the year were overvalued because they lose to Alabama and get knocked out because they don't have an opportunity to sort of let everybody else lose after they lost early in the year. But I don't like it, but I understand it's here, so I'll enjoy it when it comes in December, and hopefully by like 2030, Florida will be able to be playing in one.
Well, you got your month. You got a month to wrap your head around it. You got a month. You'll get there. All right,
Because
y'all.
old
Will
people legitimate because old people are notorious for changing their minds over a month.
Will what's the plan with Max this weekend? You taking Max down for the LSU game?
Oh yeah, dude. He's been asking me about he's like, we're going to he doesn't know what a tailgate is. So he's like, we're going to the party before the game, right, Dad? Like, and I'm like, yes, we're going to the tailgate, buddy. Like we are going. So we'll be at the Harmonic Woods tailgate probably like, I don't know, 10, 11, somewhere in that range. Games at 3:30 and stop by, say hi. Would love to see anybody who watches the show, and we appreciate everybody's support out there. So certainly, if you have an opportunity to stop by, say hi to me, say hi to Max, and have a couple of beers, and do the shot board while you're there. I'm interested to see what they have on that. They got a Gator board with like 4 shots on it. There's always a message for the opponent underneath. So hopefully the message for LSU is a good one this week.
Go Gators, beat LSU. We're due, right? We're due against LSU. Let's go. DJ Lagway's back in uniform, hopefully. And big opportunity here on Saturday in terms of bowl eligibility. So go Gators, beat the Tigers. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.